Hello, in this chapter 9 we're going to be discussing the following: por and para, the preterite and the imperfect tenses, the weather, hace que, when we use that to indicate how long ago something took place, la ropa, and the two countries for this chapter would be Ecuador and Peru. You perhaps have heard a lot about the Inca Trail, as many people have taken this trip to Cusco and to Peru, but that is the fashion in which this is going to be presented, not just an instructional PowerPoint on learning this language, but as you may experience it as if you were hiking the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu from Cusco. On this slide you see the uses for para, destination, deadline, goal, purpose, recipient, comparison, as well as the expressions that are used when using this preposition para. By the same token, we'll look at those for por and see some of those uses as well as in the following slide some of the expressions that are used for por. With this slide we only see a few expressions with para. No estar para bromas, no ser para tanto, para colmo, para que sepas, y para siempre. And there are much fewer expressions used with para than are used with por, and in the next slide we'll see some of those that are used for por, some of the uses for this preposition por, followed by some of the expressions used for por. On this slide you see the uses for por: motion, duration, reason, object of a search, means by which, exchange for or substitution, and a unit of measure. And you see how these are used on the right hand side of this slide with the sentences or expressions used with por, and you see that preposition in bold there. Por ejemplo, por el parque, por 2 meses, por su hijo, por un termómetro, por teléfono, por un nuevo, por día, por la prensa. As you see with por, in contrast to para, there are many more expressions used with this preposition por ahora, por ahí, por aquí, por casualidad. You can practice with these, pronouncing these expressions using por ejemplo, por escrito, por fin. And you'll see some of these in the quiz. There's a little quiz after this slide where you'll be able to use some of these expressions for por. On the second day of our journey, we fly from Lima to Cusco, and by car llegamos a Piscacuchu, where we begin our excursion. This is the first hiking day of the 4-day excursion, and we'll start at about 8,000 feet, between 7,500 and 8,000 feet, and the first day we'll climb to about 10,000 feet. Using both the preterite and imperfect tenses together, when narrating in the past, the imperfect describes what was happening, while the preterite typically interrupts or explicitly tells what happened. And the difference between these two is that the imperfect provides background information while the preterite indicates specific events that advance the plot. So on the next slide we'll see a story that may be somewhat familiar, and it's in both English and Spanish, and you can see the uses of both the imperfect and the preterite tenses and how they interact with one another. Over these next 2 slides you'll see some comparison and contrast of the two tenses, the preterite and the imperfect, how they are used, and the translations of how they are understood in English. So the preterite is used to express the actions that are viewed as completed, express the beginning or an ending of a past action, narrate a series of past actions, whereas the imperfect is used to describe ongoing past events, habitual actions in the past, and physical or emotional characteristics. And you see these with the preterite tense expressing completed actions by the use of time references such as ayer, fueron a Buenos Aires ayer, to express beginning or ending of past actions. Empezó a las 9. Ayer, again we have a time reference with ayer terminé el proyecto para la clase de química, as well as narrating a series of past actions or sequential events. La doctora me miró los oídos, me hizo unas preguntas y escribió la receta. So you see that she did these three things sequentially. With use of the imperfect, we're describing without any time reference given. Sandra esperaba al doctor, or expressing habitual actions and events. Cuando era joven, yo jugaba al tenis. Or describing physical and emotional states or characteristics. La chica quería descansar, se sentía mal y tenía dolor de cabeza. So with these, you can look at the English translations and see where the differences are, where there are time references given and where they are omitted, and how we use the preterite and imperfect for those particular instances. On the second day of our hike, using our prepositions, we are arriving at Guayabamba. So look at this expression or this sentence here. Caminamos durante 5 horas y llegar a Guayabamba Village, la primera campamento a 3,000 de metros. So looking at this, we could exchange some prepositions here, or add some prepositions with respect to a time reference. Caminamos por 5 horas. Caminamos por 5 horas, referencing a time duration. So we hiked for 5 hours. Para llegar a Guayabamba, in order to arrive at Guayabamba. Over the next 4 slides, we're looking at the next question, ¿Qué tiempo hace? Discussing the weather. So looking at these 4 pictures here, which weather expressions would we use to describe the weather, to say that it's snowing, or it's raining, or it's cool, or it's windy, or that it's nice out? What types of expressions would we use for that? Looking at our question, ¿Qué tiempo hace? Typically we would use hace to respond to that, but these are some other expressions that we may use. El cielo está nublado, despejado, or to discuss the degrees or temperature. El clima, to describe the climate. El clima es templado, el clima es frío, el clima es húmedo. Or you see another question down here, not necessarily ¿Qué tiempo hace?, asking what is the weather like, but ¿Qué temperatura hace?, what is the temperature like? And then using that response I to say that it's 20 grados or 30 grados, describing the weather that way. Looking at this map of North America, ¿Qué tiempo hace? ¿Qué tiempo hace en Arizona? ¿Qué tiempo hace en Miami? ¿Qué tiempo hace en Oregón o en Alaska? Por fin, ¿qué tiempo hace? ¿Hace calor? ¿Hace frío? ¿Hace viento? ¿Está nublado? ¿Está nevando? Which of these expressions would you associate with these pictures? So for this slide, you may wish to backtrack for a little bit to review the map to respond to these questions. ¿Qué tiempo hace? En Alaska, en Oregón, en San Diego, en Arizona, en Montreal y Miami. ¿Qué tiempo hace? How would you describe the weather in the picture on the left in contrast to the picture on the right? So in the picture on the left you see it's sunny, hace sol, hace mucho sol, hace calor. And the picture on the right, it's a little cloudy, it's much higher in the mountains, so it's much cooler. Hace frío, hace fresco, está nublado are some of the expressions that you could use to describe the weather in that slide. Nos despertamos a las 5:30 de la mañana, tenemos un desayuno rápido y comenzamos la caminata. Por 5 horas caminamos hasta la colina en el punto más alto del camino. Aquí vamos a encontrar muchos excursionistas y turistas. So notice the use of this preposition por. We talked about how it is used, and you've seen examples of how this is used, and we use it here to describe time duration. So we walked for 5 hours hasta una colina en el punto más alto, the highest point of the trip at 4,000 meters, a little over 14,000 feet. Aquí acampamos en la Valle Pacamayo, comemos agüedito para la cena. Por las noches, that's one of our expressions, using the preposition por. Por las noches hace frío. So you see the weather reference there with hace frío. Llevamos, using your clothing vocabulary, llevamos los suéteres y pantalones largos. Hicimos la caminata para acampar. Hicimos, using your irregular preterite, we made the hike, or we did the hike, in order to camp. Por fin llegamos al punto más alto de la caminata. It's the highest point of the Inca Trail at 14,000 feet. Estos son los finales 6 kilómetros que caminamos. Justo al lado de Machu Picchu es Huayna Picchu. Huayna Picchu is the mountain that you see there in the back, behind the llama. It has the best city of the best view of the lost city. Y para visitar, another use of the preposition para. In order to visit Huayna Picchu es necesario comprar un boleto, solo 400 entradas por día. So they only allow 400 visitors per day to this Huayna Picchu mountain, which you see there in the background. Al final, or por fin, if we wanted to use that preposition or that phrase, por fin llegué a Machu Picchu, using the preterite tense, llegué a Machu Picchu.